I was born in Ohio, where family always came first, or at least that's what I thought until my wedding day, when my husband refused to call his mother, and what I discovered later shattered everything I believed about the man I married. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because this decision didn't just end my honeymoon early, it cost me the husband I loved, turned our parents against me, and left our family so fractured that my own children haven't spoken to their cousins in 2 years. My name is Sarah, and when I met Daniel at 26, I thought I had found my perfect match. He was 30, charming, successful, and seemed to have his life completely together. We met at a coffee shop in Columbus where I was working as a teacher, and he was finishing up his business degree. Everything about him seemed right. He was polite, considerate, and treated me like I was the most important person in his world. Our relationship moved quickly, and within 8 months, he proposed to me at the same coffee shop where we first met. During our engagement, I noticed that Daniel rarely talked about his mother, Linda. Whenever I brought her up, he would change the subject or give short, vague answers. I met her only twice before the wedding. The first time was at a family dinner where she seemed distant and cold, barely making eye contact with me. The second time was at our engagement party, where she showed up late, stayed for less than an hour, and left without saying goodbye. I found it strange, but Daniel brushed it off, saying his mother was just shy and had trouble with social situations. I tried to build a relationship with Linda, sending her text messages and calling her to discuss wedding plans, but she rarely responded. When she did, her answers were brief and felt forced. Daniel told me not to take it personally, that his mother had always been like that with everyone. I wanted to believe him, because I loved him and trusted him completely. Looking back now, I realize how many red flags I ignored because I was blinded by love and the excitement of planning our future together. The wedding planning process was mostly smooth, except for anything involving Linda. She refused to participate in choosing flowers, didn't want to go dress shopping with me and my mother, and showed no interest in any of the traditional mother-in-law activities. My own mother was hurt by this because she had hoped to bond with Linda and form a relationship. I found myself constantly making excuses for her behavior, telling my mother that Linda was just different and that we needed to respect her boundaries. As the wedding day approached, Daniel became increasingly anxious. I assumed it was normal pre-wedding jitters, so I tried to be supportive and understanding. He would stay up late at night, staring at his phone, and when I asked him what was wrong, he would say he was just stressed about work. I noticed he was receiving calls from an unknown number that he would never answer in front of me. He would step outside or go to another room, and when he came back, he would seem upset or disturbed. Our wedding day arrived on a beautiful Saturday in June. The ceremony was planned for 4 p.m. at a lovely outdoor venue just outside Columbus. The morning started perfectly. I was surrounded by my bridesmaids, getting my hair and makeup done, feeling like the happiest woman alive. My mother kept crying happy tears, and my father couldn't stop smiling. Everything felt magical and right. Then, around noon, my mother came to me with a concerned look on her face. She told me that Linda had called the venue saying she might not make it to the wedding because she wasn't feeling well. My heart sank. I immediately went to find Daniel, who was in a separate area with his groomsmen. When I told him about his mother's call, his face went completely pale. He didn't seem surprised, just resigned, like he had been expecting this. I asked Daniel to call his mother and check on her, to see if there was anything we could do to help her get to the wedding. He refused. He flat out refused to call her. I was stunned. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't want to check on his own mother on our wedding day. I pressed him, asking if they had a fight or if something was wrong between them. He just shook his head and said he didn't want to talk about it, that we should focus on our wedding. I felt hurt and confused, but I didn't want to start a fight on our wedding day, so I dropped it. I called Linda myself, but she didn't answer. I left her a voicemail telling her that we loved her and hoped she would feel better soon, and that we understood if she couldn't make it. Part of me hoped she would come anyway, that whatever was bothering her would resolve itself. The ceremony happened without Linda. Daniel seemed distracted throughout the entire event. He said his vows, but there was something hollow in his voice, something missing. I tried to ignore it and focus on the fact that we were finally married, that this was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. Our guests celebrated. The reception was beautiful, and on the surface everything looked perfect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That night, after the reception ended and we went to our hotel room, I brought up the subject of his mother again. I told Daniel that I was worried about her and that his refusal to call her had bothered me all day. He got defensive immediately. He said that his relationship with his mother was complicated and that I wouldn't understand. I told him that I was his wife now and that I deserved to understand. He said he would explain everything later, but not on our wedding night. He wanted us to just enjoy being married. I tried to let it go, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Something was deeply wrong, and my husband was hiding it from me. We had built our relationship on trust and honesty, or so I thought, and now I was realizing that there were parts of Daniel's life that he had kept completely hidden from me. I felt betrayed, even though I didn't yet know what he was hiding. The next day, we flew to Hawaii for our honeymoon. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. We had planned 2 weeks in paradise, staying at a beautiful resort on Maui, with excursions planned for snorkeling, hiking, and exploring the island. I thought that once we got away from the stress of the wedding, Daniel would relax and open up to me about his mother and whatever was troubling him. Instead, he became more withdrawn. He spent hours on his phone, typing messages to someone he wouldn't tell me about. When I asked who he was talking to, he would say it was work or friends, but I knew he was lying. I could see it in his eyes. The first 3 days of our honeymoon were tense and uncomfortable. We barely spoke to each other beyond surface-level pleasantries. We went through the motions of being a happy couple on their honeymoon, but the reality was that we were both miserable. On the 4th day, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I woke up early, before Daniel, and I took his phone while he was still sleeping. I know this was a violation of his privacy, and I had never done anything like that before in my life, but I felt desperate and scared. I needed to know what was happening, what he was hiding from me. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and started going through his messages. What I found confused me at first. There were dozens of messages from a number saved as just the letter M. The messages were recent, starting from the week before our wedding. They were strange and cryptic. M kept asking Daniel if he had told me yet, saying that I deserved to know the truth, that keeping secrets would destroy our marriage before it even began. Daniel's responses were defensive and angry. He told M to stay out of his life, that what happened in the past should stay in the past. I kept scrolling, trying to find more context, trying to understand what truth Daniel was supposed to tell me. Then I found a message from M that made my blood run cold. The message said, "You can't run from this forever, Daniel. She's going to find out that I'm not really your mother, that I'm your father's second wife, and that your real mother is in prison for what she did to your sister." I read that message over and over, trying to process what it meant. Linda wasn't his mother. His real mother was in prison. He had a sister that he had never mentioned. Nothing made sense. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The man I had married was a complete stranger. I didn't even know his basic family history. How many other lies had he told me? How much of our relationship was built on deception? My hands were shaking as I continued reading. The messages revealed more of the story in pieces. Daniel's real mother, whose name was Catherine, had killed his younger sister, Emily, when Daniel was 15 years old. It was a murder case that had apparently been covered extensively by the news in their hometown in Michigan. Catherine had suffered from severe mental illness and had stopped taking her medication. One night, during a psychotic episode. She had believed that Emily was possessed by a demon and needed to be saved. She had suffocated Emily while Daniel and his father were out of the house. Daniel had found his sister's body when he came home. The trauma of that discovery had destroyed him. His father, Thomas, had eventually remarried Linda, who had tried to be a mother figure to Daniel, but he had never been able to accept her. He blamed himself for not being home to protect Emily. He blamed his father for marrying someone new. He blamed Linda for trying to replace his real mother. And most of all, he blamed Catherine for taking his sister away from him. The messages revealed that Catherine was still in prison, serving a life sentence, and that she had been trying to reach out to Daniel for years through letters. Linda had been the one forwarding these letters to Daniel, which is why he had been so distant from her. Every time Linda contacted him, it was a reminder of the worst day of his life. The unknown number that had been calling him during our engagement was Linda, trying to convince him to tell me the truth before we got married. Now, this is where I did something that I want you to advise me on, if I was right or wrong. I unlocked the bathroom door, walked back into our hotel room, and woke Daniel up by throwing his phone onto the bed next to him. I told him I had read everything that I knew about Catherine, about Emily, about the lies he had been telling me for our entire relationship. He sat up, looking panicked and guilty, and tried to explain himself. He said he had wanted to tell me but didn't know how. He said he was afraid I would judge him or leave him if I knew the truth about his family. He said he had been planning to tell me after the wedding, after we had settled into married life. He said he loved me and that his past didn't define who he was now. But all I could hear was more excuses, more lies, more evidence that the man I had married didn't trust me enough to be honest with me about the most important parts of his life. I asked him why he had refused to call Linda on our wedding day. He explained that Linda had sent him a letter from Catherine the morning of the wedding. Catherine had written that she was dying of cancer and wanted to see Daniel one last time before she passed away. Linda had begged Daniel to at least consider visiting his mother in prison, to give Catherine a chance to apologize and say goodbye. Daniel had been so angry and overwhelmed by the letter that he couldn't bring himself to speak to Linda at all. He told me that he had never wanted me to know about Catherine because he was ashamed. He was ashamed that his mother was a murderer, ashamed that his sister had died because his family hadn't gotten his mother the help she needed, ashamed that he came from such a broken and tragic background. He had created a false story about his mother being shy and distant because it was easier than telling the truth. He had kept me away from Linda because he was afraid that Linda would tell me everything. I listened to all of this, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me felt sympathy for Daniel and what he had been through. Losing a sister to murder, especially at the hands of his own mother, was a trauma I couldn't even imagine. But another part of me felt deeply betrayed and angry. He had lied to me about fundamental aspects of his identity and his family. He had let me marry him without knowing the truth. He had made decisions about our relationship without giving me the information I needed to make my own informed choices. I told Daniel that I needed time to think, that I couldn't be around him right then. I packed a bag and moved to a different room in the resort. He tried to stop me, tried to convince me to stay and talk things through, but I couldn't. I felt suffocated by all the secrets and lies. I needed space to process everything I had learned. For the next 2 days, I stayed in my room, barely eating, just thinking about my marriage and what I should do next. During those 2 days, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I researched the case online. I found news articles about Catherine's trial, about Emily's death, about the impact on their small community in Michigan. I saw photos of Daniel as a teenager, his face haunted and grief-stricken, standing next to his father at the funeral. I read about how Catherine had been diagnosed with schizophrenia years before the murder, but had repeatedly refused treatment. I learned that there had been warning signs, incidents where Catherine had become violent or delusional, but the family had kept it private. The more I read, the more I understood why Daniel had hidden this from me. It was a nightmare that no one should have to live through, but understanding why he lied didn't make the lying okay. I was his wife. He should have trusted me with this before we got married. He should have given me the choice to decide if I could handle being part of a family with this kind of history. Instead, he had made that decision for me, and now I was trapped in a marriage with someone I didn't really know. On the third day of my isolation, Linda called me. I don't know how she got my number, but I answered because I needed to hear her side of the story. She was crying when I answered. She apologized for not coming to the wedding, for not being more present in our relationship, for everything. She explained that she had been trying to protect Daniel while also encouraging him to be honest with me. She said she had known that keeping the secret would eventually destroy our marriage, which is why she had sent him Catherine's letter on the wedding day. Linda told me that she loved Daniel like he was her own son, even though he had never fully accepted her. She had married Thomas knowing that Daniel came with deep trauma and complicated feelings about his family. She had tried for 15 years to be there for him, to help him heal, but he had kept her at a distance. She said that Thomas had died 5 years ago from a heart attack, and since then, Daniel had barely spoken to her at all. She had hoped that our marriage would bring Daniel some happiness and maybe help him finally move past his trauma. I asked Linda about Catherine and the letters. She said that Catherine had been writing to Daniel for years, but he refused to read any of them. Linda had kept all the letters in a box, hoping that one day Daniel would be ready to face his past. When Catherine's lawyer had contacted Linda to say that Catherine was dying and wanted to see her son, Linda had made the decision to forward the most recent letter to Daniel before the wedding. She thought that maybe the urgency of Catherine's illness would push Daniel to finally confront his feelings. Linda admitted that her timing had been terrible, that she should have waited until after the honeymoon or approached it differently. But she had been desperate. She had watched Daniel carry his pain and anger for so long, and she believed that making peace with Catherine, even just through a final conversation, might give him closure. She had never intended to ruin our wedding day or cause problems in our marriage. She had only wanted to help Daniel heal. After talking to Linda for over an hour, I felt more confused than ever. I could see that everyone in this situation had been trying to do what they thought was right, but the result was a massive web of secrets and pain that had exploded on what should have been the happiest time of my life. I thanked Linda for her honesty and told her I needed more time to figure out what to do next. That evening, Daniel came to my room. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. He begged me to come back to our room, to give him a chance to make things right. He said he would do anything to fix our marriage, that he would go to therapy, that he would be completely honest with me from now on, that he would even consider visiting Catherine, if that's what I wanted. He was desperate and broken, and part of me wanted to comfort him and tell him everything would be okay. But I couldn't do it. The trust was shattered. I kept thinking about all the times during our relationship when he could have told me the truth. All the late-night conversations where we talked about our dreams and fears. All the times I had shared my deepest insecurities with him, and he had never once mentioned the most significant trauma of his life. How could I build a life with someone who could keep such a massive secret? What else would he hide from me in the future? I told Daniel that I wanted to go home, that I couldn't continue the honeymoon pretending everything was fine. He agreed, though I could see it was breaking his heart. We booked flights back to Ohio for the next day. The flight home was silent and uncomfortable. We sat next to each other but didn't speak. I spent the entire flight staring out the window, wondering if my marriage was already over just days after it had begun. When we got back to our apartment in Columbus, I moved into the spare bedroom. I told Daniel that I needed time and space to figure out if I could forgive him and move forward. He respected my wishes, though I could tell he was struggling. He would leave notes for me around the apartment, little messages saying he loved me and was sorry. He tried to give me space, while also making it clear that he was there whenever I was ready to talk. A week after we returned from Hawaii, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided that I needed to meet Catherine. I needed to hear her story directly, to understand what had happened to Emily, to see if there was any way to make sense of this tragedy. I knew Daniel would be against it, so I didn't tell him. I contacted the prison in Michigan where Catherine was being held and arranged a visit. The drive to Michigan took me about 4 hours. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not Daniel, not my parents, not even my closest friends. I needed to do this alone. When I arrived at the prison, I felt nervous and scared. I had never been to a prison before, and the whole experience was intimidating. The security checks, the cold institutional atmosphere, the sense of hopelessness that seemed to permeate the walls, it all made me want to turn around and leave. But I didn't leave. I went through the visitor process and waited in a stark room with white walls and metal tables. When Catherine was brought in, I was shocked by how small and frail she looked. She was only 58 years old, but she looked much older. The cancer was clearly taking its toll on her body. She had been beautiful once. I could tell from the bone structure of her face, but years of imprisonment and illness had aged her beyond her years. Catherine sat down across from me, her hands shaking. She looked at me with surprise and confusion. She had been expecting Daniel, not his new wife that she didn't know existed. I introduced myself and explained that I had just married her son, that I had recently learned about what had happened to Emily, and that I wanted to understand. Catherine started crying immediately. She said she had been praying for years that Daniel would find happiness, that he would build a life beyond the tragedy she had caused. For the next 2 hours, Catherine told me everything. She talked about her mental illness, about how she had struggled with delusions and paranoia for years before Emily's death. She described the night of the murder in painful detail, how she had genuinely believed she was saving Emily from demonic possession, how she had been so deep in her psychotic episode that she couldn't distinguish reality from her delusions. She said that when she came back to herself and realized what she had done, she had wanted to die. Catherine told me about the trial, about how she had pleaded guilty because she couldn't bear to put Daniel and Thomas through a lengthy court process. She had accepted her life sentence without appeal. She said she deserved to be in prison, that nothing could ever make up for what she had done. She had spent every day of the past 15 years thinking about Emily, about the daughter she had killed, about the son whose life she had destroyed. She talked about Daniel, about the bright and happy boy he had been before the murder, and the traumatized and angry teenager he had become after. She said she understood why he couldn't forgive her, why he had never responded to any of her letters. She had written to him dozens of times over the years, trying to explain, trying to apologize, but she had never expected forgiveness. She just wanted him to know that she loved him and that she was sorry. Catherine told me that she had been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer 6 months earlier. The doctors had given her less than a year to live. She had asked to see Daniel one last time, not to burden him with guilt, but to tell him that she loved him and to release him from any obligation to carry her memory. She wanted him to know that he was allowed to be happy, to move on, to live a full life without the weight of what she had done. Listening to Catherine was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I felt overwhelming sadness for everyone involved, for Emily, who had lost her life so young, for Daniel, who had lost his sister and his mother in one terrible night, for Thomas, who had lost his daughter and watched his family fall apart, for Linda, who had tried so hard to help a family that couldn't be fixed, and even for Catherine, who had to live with the knowledge of what she had done while suffering from an illness she hadn't asked for. When the visit was over, I drove back to Ohio in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about Catherine's face, about the genuine remorse and pain I had seen in her eyes. I didn't know what to do with all the information I had gathered. I had gone to the prison hoping for clarity, for some kind of answer that would tell me whether I should stay in my marriage or leave. Instead, I had come away with an even deeper understanding of how complicated and tragic the whole situation was. When I got home, Daniel was waiting for me in the living room. He had figured out where I had gone. Linda had called him after the prison contacted her to confirm my visit. Daniel was furious. He asked me how I could have gone behind his back to see Catherine, how I could have betrayed his trust like that. I almost laughed at the irony of him talking about betraying trust after he had lied to me about his entire family history. We had the biggest fight of our relationship that night. Daniel said I had no right to visit Catherine, that I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I told him that he had crossed a line when he married me without telling me the truth, that if he had been honest from the beginning, I wouldn't have felt the need to go to the prison myself. We went back and forth for hours, both of us saying things we regretted, both of us too hurt and angry to back down. Finally, in the middle of the fight, Daniel broke down completely. He collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, and told me about finding Emily's body. He described every detail of that day, from the moment he walked into her room to the moment the police arrived. He talked about the guilt he had carried for 15 years, the guilt of not being home to protect her, the guilt of not recognizing that his mother was in crisis. He said he had nightmares about that day almost every night, that he woke up in cold sweats reliving the moment he realized his sister was dead. He told me that he had built walls around that part of his life because it was the only way he knew how to function. If he let himself think about Catherine and Emily, if he acknowledged the reality of what had happened, he would fall apart. So he had created a story about a distant mother and moved to a different state and tried to build a new life where no one knew about his past. Meeting me had given him hope that he could finally be happy, that he could have a normal life with someone who loved him without knowing about his tragedy. He said he knew he should have told me before we got married, but he had been terrified of losing me. Every time he tried to bring it up, he would panic and convince himself that it could wait, that he would tell me later when the time was right. But the right time never came, and then we were engaged, and then we were planning a wedding, and before he knew it, we were married, and he still hadn't found the courage to be honest with me. Hearing Daniel talk about his pain and trauma made me realize something important. This wasn't just about him lying to me. This was about a deeply wounded person who had been trying to survive the best way he knew how. His choices had been wrong, and his lies had hurt me, but they had come from a place of fear and self-preservation, not malice. He hadn't lied to manipulate or control me. He had lied because he was terrified of being vulnerable and showing me the broken parts of himself. But understanding why he lied still didn't fix the problem. The foundation of our marriage was cracked. We had started our life together with a massive secret between us, and now that the secret was out, we had to decide if we could rebuild. I told Daniel that I needed him to go to therapy, that he needed to deal with his trauma instead of running from it. I said that if we were going to stay married, it had to be with complete honesty from now on. No more secrets, no more lies, no matter how hard the truth might be. Daniel agreed to therapy. He started seeing a counselor who specialized in trauma and grief. The sessions were hard for him. He had to confront feelings and memories he had been suppressing for years. There were days when he would come home from therapy, emotionally exhausted and barely able to speak. But slowly, over the course of several months, I started to see changes in him. He became more open with me, more willing to talk about his past and his feelings. The walls he had built started to come down. During this time, I also made a decision about Catherine. I talked to Daniel about my visit to the prison and what Catherine had said. I told him that Catherine was dying and that she wanted to see him one last time. I said that I thought he should go, not for Catherine's sake, but for his own. I believed that seeing her and hearing her apology directly might give him the closure he needed to finally move past his trauma. Daniel was resistant at first. He said he didn't owe Catherine anything, that seeing her would only bring back painful memories, but his therapist encouraged him to at least consider it. After weeks of discussion and internal struggle, Daniel finally agreed to visit Catherine. He asked me to come with him for support, and I said yes. We made the drive to Michigan together on a cold day in October. Daniel was quiet and tense during the entire trip. When we arrived at the prison and went through the visitor process, his hands were shaking. I held his hand as we waited for Catherine to be brought into the visitation room. When she appeared, looking even more frail than she had during my first visit, Daniel's face crumpled. The conversation between Daniel and Catherine was gut-wrenching to witness. She apologized over and over, telling him how sorry she was for taking Emily away from him, for destroying their family, for all the pain she had caused. She told him that she loved him, that she had always loved him, even when her illness made her incapable of showing it properly. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted him to know that none of what happened was his fault. Daniel didn't say much during the visit. He mostly just listened, tears streaming down his face. At the end of the visit, Catherine asked if she could hug her son one last time. Daniel hesitated for a long moment, and then he nodded. They embraced, both of them crying, and I had to look away because it was too private and painful to watch. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet but seemed lighter somehow, like a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He told me that he didn't forgive Catherine for what she had done, that he might never be able to forgive her, but that he understood her in a way he hadn't before. Seeing her dying and frail, hearing her genuine remorse, it had made her human to him again, instead of just the monster who killed his sister. Over the next few months, things between Daniel and me slowly improved. We were rebuilding our marriage on a foundation of honesty and trust. He continued with therapy, and I started going to therapy too, because I realized I needed help processing everything that had happened. We learned how to communicate better, how to share our feelings without letting them turn into fights. But not everyone was happy about our progress. My parents and Daniel's family were furious with me for visiting Catherine without telling anyone. My mother said I had overstepped and gotten involved in something that wasn't my business. Daniel's aunt, his father's sister who had been close to Emily, said I had betrayed Daniel by going behind his back. Even Linda was upset, saying I should have talked to her first before visiting Catherine. The conflict with our families escalated quickly. My parents stopped inviting Daniel to family dinners. Daniel's extended family stopped speaking to both of us. There were accusations and arguments. People took sides. My sister said I should have divorced Daniel the moment I found out he had lied to me. Daniel's cousin said I was manipulative for convincing Daniel to visit Catherine. Everyone had opinions about what we should have done differently. The situation reached a breaking point when my brother confronted Daniel at a family gathering we had been invited to by my grandmother. My brother said that Daniel was toxic and damaged, that he was going to drag me down with him, and that our family would be better off if I left him. Daniel tried to stay calm, but my brother kept pushing, making cruel comments about Daniel's mother being a murderer and about how Daniel was probably crazy too. Daniel finally snapped and got into a physical altercation with my brother. It wasn't a serious fight, just some shoving and yelling before I and other family members separated them, but the damage was done. My parents demanded that I choose between Daniel and my family. They said that if I stayed with Daniel, I would no longer be welcome at family events. My father said he couldn't support a marriage that had started with lies and continued with drama. I was devastated. I had just spent months working to save my marriage, and now my own family was trying to force me to end it. I told my parents that I loved Daniel, that he was getting help, and that we were making progress, and that I wasn't going to abandon him because his life had been complicated and traumatic. My mother said I was making a mistake, that I was throwing away my family for a man who had already proven he couldn't be trusted. The estrangement from my family became official. My parents, my siblings, my aunts and uncles, they all stopped talking to me. I wasn't invited to family gatherings anymore. When my nephew was born a few months later, I found out through social media instead of getting a call from my sister. The isolation was painful, but I believed I was making the right choice in standing by Daniel. Daniel and I also became distanced from his extended family. His aunt and cousins blamed me for forcing Daniel to confront his past when he wasn't ready. They said I had been selfish and had only made things worse for him. Linda was the only one who remained supportive, but even her relationship with Daniel was strained. He appreciated that she had tried to help, but he still struggled with accepting her as a mother figure. Catherine passed away 4 months after our visit to the prison. Linda called to tell us that Catherine had died peacefully in the prison hospital. There was a small memorial service that only Linda and a few of Catherine's old friends attended. Daniel didn't go to the service, but he did write a letter that Linda read on his behalf. In the letter, Daniel said that he would always love the mother Catherine had been before her illness, that he mourned the family they could have been, and that he hoped she had found peace. After Catherine's death, Daniel seemed to make more progress in therapy. It was like her passing had closed a chapter of his life that he had been unable to close on his own. He started talking more openly about Emily, sharing memories of his sister with me. He showed me photos from their childhood, told me stories about the games they used to play, the way Emily used to laugh at his jokes. It was bittersweet, but it felt like healing. Our marriage continued to improve, but the damage to our relationships with our families was permanent. My children, when we eventually had them 2 years later, grew up barely knowing their grandparents. My parents met our daughter once at the hospital right after she was born, but after that, contact was minimal. When our son was born, a year after that, my parents didn't even come to the hospital. They had decided that by staying with Daniel, I had chosen him over them, and they couldn't forgive that choice. Daniel's extended family was the same. His cousins had children around the same time we did, but our kids never played together. There were no family reunions, no holiday gatherings, no sense of being part of a larger family unit. It was just the 3 of us, and later the 4 of us, trying to build our own small family away from everyone else. The isolation took a toll on both of us. I missed my family constantly. There were days when I would see something that reminded me of my mother or my sister, and I would cry because I couldn't share it with them. Daniel felt guilty that his past had cost me my family. He would apologize and say that maybe my parents were right, that maybe I should have left him, but I never regretted my choice to stay. I believed in our marriage and in the man Daniel was becoming. Years passed, and the estrangement continued. My parents sent birthday cards to our children but never visited. My siblings moved on with their lives without me in them. Daniel's family did the same. It was like we had become ghosts to them, present in memory but absent in reality. Our children would ask why they didn't have grandparents like other kids, why they never saw their cousins, and I would struggle to explain in a way that made sense to them. When our daughter turned 6, she asked me directly why Grandma and Grandpa didn't love her. It broke my heart. I tried to explain that it was complicated, that adults sometimes make decisions that hurt other people, even when they don't mean to, but she was too young to understand. She just knew that other kids had grandparents who came to their school plays and birthday parties, and she didn't. The impact of my decision to stand by Daniel was affecting not just me, but my children, and that realization was crushing. I started to question whether I had made the right choice. Maybe my parents had been right. Maybe I should have left Daniel when I found out about his lies. Maybe I should have prioritized my family of origin over my marriage. The doubt ate away at me, especially when I saw how my children suffered from not having extended family in their lives. But then I would look at Daniel, at the man he had become through years of therapy and hard work, and I would remember why I had chosen to stay. He was a good husband and a good father. He was honest with me now, completely open about his feelings and his struggles. He had faced his trauma instead of running from it. He had grown into someone I was proud to be married to. Leaving him would have been abandoning someone who needed support and love during the hardest time of his life, and I couldn't have lived with myself if I had done that. Still, the cost was high. My relationship with my parents never recovered. Even years later, there was a wall between us that couldn't be torn down. We were polite when we occasionally saw each other at events we both felt obligated to attend, but the warmth was gone. My mother would ask about the children, but never offered to babysit or spend real time with them. My father barely acknowledged Daniel's existence. My siblings followed our parents' lead, keeping me at arm's length, making it clear that I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. The fracture in the family extended beyond just my immediate relatives. My cousins, who I had been close to growing up, stopped inviting me to gatherings. Family weddings became awkward events where I would show up, stay for the ceremony, and leave before the reception because the tension was too uncomfortable. My children noticed that their cousins would play together at these events but never included them, and I had to watch my kids stand on the sidelines, confused about why they were being excluded. Daniel's family situation was similarly painful. His cousin Mark had twin boys the same age as our daughter, and they lived only 20 minutes away from us, but we never arranged playdates. His Aunt Helen, who had been like a grandmother to Daniel growing up, refused to acknowledge our children's existence. She blamed me for dragging Daniel back into his traumatic past, for forcing him to confront Catherine when he had spent years trying to move on. She said I had been selfish and destructive, and that Daniel would have been better off if he had never met me. Linda remained the only family connection we had. She visited regularly, brought gifts for the children, and tried to be the grandmother they deserved. But she was elderly and lived several hours away, so her visits were infrequent. She did her best, but she couldn't replace an entire extended family. The children loved her, but they still felt the absence of other grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins in their lives. As the years went on, I watched other families around us thrive with their support systems. Our neighbors had parents who would come over to watch the kids so the couple could have date nights. My coworkers talked about big family gatherings for holidays, where everyone came together. I saw posts on social media of my siblings with our parents, all smiling together at birthday parties and graduations, and I felt a deep ache knowing I wasn't part of that anymore. There were practical consequences, too. When I got sick with pneumonia and was hospitalized for a week, Daniel had to take time off work to care for the children because we had no family to help. When Daniel's company sent him on a business trip and I had a work emergency at the same time, we had to scramble to find childcare because there were no grandparents to call. Other couples had built-in support systems, but we were on our own, trying to manage everything without a safety net. The emotional toll was equally heavy. There were moments when I desperately wanted my mother's advice about parenting, when I wanted to call my sister to vent about a hard day, when I wanted my children to experience the kind of close family bonds I had grown up with. But those options weren't available to me anymore because of the choices I had made. I had chosen my husband over my family, and this isolation was the consequence. Daniel's guilt about the situation never fully went away. Even though he had made tremendous progress in therapy and had learned to manage his trauma, he still blamed himself for the rift between me and my family. He would say that if he had just been honest with me from the beginning, none of this would have happened. I would tell him that it wasn't his fault, that my family's reaction had been their choice, but I could see the weight of it in his eyes. Our marriage itself was strong, stronger than it had been in the beginning. We had gone through hell together and come out the other side. We communicated well, trusted each other completely, and had built a life that worked for us. But the shadow of our fractured family relationships hung over everything. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone was tinged with sadness because of who wasn't there to share it with us. When our son started kindergarten, the school asked us to fill out an emergency contact form. There was space for multiple relatives, but beyond Daniel and me, we only had Linda to list. The teacher looked at the form with concern and asked if there was really no one else, no grandparents or aunts or uncles who could be contacted in case of emergency. I had to explain that we were estranged from our families and the teacher's expression of pity made me feel ashamed, like I had failed my children by not maintaining those relationships. The estrangement affected my mental health in ways I hadn't anticipated. I started experiencing anxiety and depression, feeling overwhelmed by the isolation and the weight of my choices. I went to therapy myself, working through the grief of losing my family, while also trying to justify my decision to stay with Daniel. My therapist helped me understand that I had been in an impossible situation, that there was no perfect choice, and that I had done the best I could with the information and resources I had at the time. But understanding intellectually that I had done my best didn't stop the emotional pain. I grieved for the relationship I no longer had with my mother, for the sister bond that had been broken, for the extended family my children would never know. I grieved for the version of my life I had imagined when I got married, where Daniel and I would be surrounded by loving family members who supported us and cherished our children. Daniel and I had many late-night conversations about whether we had made the right decisions. He wondered if he should have just told me the truth from the beginning, before we got too serious, giving me the choice to walk away before we were married. I wondered if I should have been less confrontational with my family, if I should have tried harder to bridge the gap, if there was some way I could have maintained both my marriage and my family relationships. We talked about my decision to visit Catherine without telling Daniel, which had been the catalyst for so much of the family conflict. Daniel had eventually come to see that visit as a turning point in his healing, something that had ultimately helped him even though it had felt like a betrayal at the time. But my family saw it differently. They saw it as me choosing Daniel's needs over respecting boundaries, as me getting too involved in something that wasn't really my business, as me causing drama where there didn't need to be any. Looking back, I could see both perspectives. I understood why my family felt I had overstepped. I had made a major decision about engaging with Daniel's past without consulting anyone, and that decision had ripple effects that touched everyone around us. But I also believed that I had needed to understand the full truth of what Daniel had been through, and that meeting Catherine had been necessary for my own peace of mind and for our marriage to have any chance of surviving. The question that haunted me most was whether I should have just left Daniel when I found out he had lied to me. My family certainly thought so. They believed that starting a marriage with such a massive deception meant the relationship was fundamentally broken beyond repair. They thought I should have annulled the marriage or gotten a divorce immediately while we were still newlyweds and hadn't built a life together yet. Part of me understood their perspective. Daniel had lied about something huge, something that defined his entire life and history. He had let me marry him without giving me crucial information about who he was and where he came from. That kind of deception was serious, and many people would have walked away. Maybe I should have been one of those people. Maybe the smart choice, the self-respecting choice, would have been to end things and start over with someone who would be honest with me from day one. But another part of me believed that marriage was supposed to be about standing by someone through hard times, about working through problems instead of giving up at the first sign of trouble. Daniel hadn't lied to hurt me or manipulate me. He had lied because he was traumatized and scared and didn't know how to be vulnerable about the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Was that really grounds for ending a marriage before it even began, especially when he was willing to do the work to make things right? I thought about the vows we had taken at our wedding, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. Daniel's trauma and his difficulty being honest about it were part of the worse, part of the sickness. If I had left him the moment things got hard, what would that say about the commitment I had made? But then again, those vows were based on a false foundation. I had married someone I didn't fully know. Did that change the nature of the commitment? These questions circled in my mind constantly, especially during the times when the consequences of my choices felt overwhelming. When my daughter cried because she didn't have a grandmother to make her cookies like her friends did, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. When my son asked why we never went to big family gatherings like other families, I questioned whether preserving my marriage had been worth the cost to my children. But then there were other moments, good moments, that reminded me why I had stayed. Family game nights where Daniel and I and the kids would laugh until our stomachs hurt. Quiet evenings after the children were asleep, when Daniel and I would talk about our dreams and plans for the future. Watching Daniel be a present, loving father to our children in a way his own father had struggled to be after losing Emily. These moments showed me the life we had built together, flawed and isolated as it was, and I couldn't imagine walking away from it. Daniel had grown so much from the broken man who had hidden his past from me. Through years of therapy, he had learned to talk about his trauma without falling apart. He had processed his grief over losing Emily and had come to terms with what his mother's illness had taken from him. He had even managed to build a better relationship with Linda, finally accepting her role in his life and appreciating what she had tried to do for him over the years. He had become someone who could talk openly with our children about difficult topics, who taught them the importance of honesty and vulnerability. When our daughter was 7 and came home crying because a friend had betrayed her trust, Daniel sat with her and talked about how painful betrayal could be, but also about how people made mistakes and sometimes deserved second chances. He used his own experience, age appropriately, to help her understand that people were complicated and that hurt didn't have to be permanent. These were the moments when I felt confident I had made the right choice. I had stood by someone who needed support, and because of that support, he had been able to heal and become a better person. If I had left him when things were at their worst, he might have given up on himself completely. Instead, he had fought to save our marriage and had done the hard work of confronting his demons. That was worth something, wasn't it? But the cost to my children still weighed on me. They were innocent in all of this, yet they were paying the price for adult decisions and conflicts they had no part in. They would grow up with a different family experience than I had, more isolated, more dependent on just their parents. I worried about what that would mean for them in the long term, whether they would resent me when they got older for choosing a path that had cut them off from extended family. I tried to compensate by building chosen family for them. We became close with neighbors and friends from school. We joined community groups and made sure the children had strong relationships with other adults who could be mentor figures. It wasn't the same as having grandparents and cousins, but it was something. Our children grew up knowing they were loved, even if the circle of people who loved them was smaller than it should have been. As our children got older and started asking harder questions, Daniel and I had to decide how much to tell them about our family history. We agreed that we would be honest in age-appropriate ways, that we wouldn't repeat the pattern of keeping secrets. When our daughter was 10, we told her a simplified version of what had happened to Daniel's sister and why his family situation was complicated. She was shocked and sad, but she appreciated that we trusted her with the truth. We told her that sometimes families broke apart because people had different ideas about what was right, and that our family had been through something very difficult that had caused a lot of hurt. We explained that we had done what we thought was best, but that our choices had consequences. And one of those consequences was that we didn't see our extended family very much. She seemed to understand, though I could tell she wished things were different. Our son, who was younger and more sensitive, took the information harder when we told him a few years later. He couldn't understand why his grandparents wouldn't want to be part of his life, why the actions of adults he had never met had determined the shape of his childhood. He went through a period of anger, asking why we couldn't just apologize and fix things, not understanding that some rifts were too deep to bridge. I tried to explain that sometimes people held on to hurt and anger for so long that it became part of who they were, and that no amount of apologizing could change that. I told him that his grandparents loved him in their own way, but that they had been hurt by my choices and couldn't separate that hurt from their relationship with him. It was a painful conversation, one that no parent wants to have, but it was the truth, and we had promised ourselves we would be truthful with our children. The family situation came to a head when my father passed away suddenly from a heart attack when our daughter was 12 and our son was 11. My mother called to tell me, and I could hear the grief and anger in her voice. She said there would be a funeral, that I could come if I wanted, but that Daniel was not welcome. She said she couldn't bear to see the man who had caused so much division in our family at her husband's funeral. I was devastated. My father and I had been close when I was growing up, and even though we had been estranged for years, I had always held out hope that we would reconcile before it was too late. Now he was gone, and I would never have that chance. I wanted to go to the funeral to say goodbye, to support my mother in her grief, but I couldn't accept her condition that Daniel stay home. He was my husband, my partner. We had been through everything together. How could I go to my father's funeral without him? Daniel told me to go, that he understood if I needed to be with my family during this time, that he wouldn't be offended if I went alone. But I couldn't do it. Going without him felt like betraying our marriage, like giving in to my mother's refusal to accept my choices. After agonizing over the decision for days, I decided not to attend the funeral. Instead, I went to the cemetery the day after the burial, alone, and said my goodbyes to my father in private. My family was furious that I hadn't come to the funeral. My sister sent me a long, angry text saying I was selfish and cruel, that I had chosen my husband over my own father even in death. My mother didn't speak to me at all for months afterward. The rift that had existed before became a chasm, one that I knew would probably never be crossed. The grief I felt over my father's death was complicated by the guilt and regret over our estrangement. I mourned not just his death, but the relationship we had lost years before, the time we could have spent together if things had been different. I wondered if I should have made different choices, if I should have tried harder to maintain a relationship with my family even while standing by Daniel. Maybe there had been a middle path I hadn't seen, a way to honor both my marriage and my family of origin. In the years following my father's death, I continued to struggle with these questions. My mother grew older and more isolated, and I worried about her being alone. My siblings had their own families and busy lives, and I knew my mother spent a lot of time by herself. I would sometimes drive by my childhood home, seeing her car in the driveway, and feel an overwhelming urge to stop and knock on the door, to try one more time to bridge the gap between us. But I never did. The hurt was too deep, the patterns too entrenched. We had all said things we couldn't take back, made choices we couldn't undo. My mother had made it clear that accepting me meant accepting Daniel, and she couldn't do that. She saw him as the reason her family had fallen apart, the outsider who had brought chaos and pain into our lives. Nothing I said could change her mind. Daniel and I reached our 10th wedding anniversary, a milestone that felt significant given everything we had been through. We celebrated quietly, just the two of us, and reflected on the journey we had taken together. We had survived betrayal, trauma, family estrangement, and countless other challenges. Our marriage had been forged in fire, and while it bore the scars of what we had endured, it was still standing. But even in that moment of celebration, I couldn't help thinking about what was missing. There were no parents toasting us at an anniversary party, no siblings sharing funny stories about our relationship, no extended family gathered to celebrate our milestone. It was just us, as it had always been, making our way through life without the support network most people took for granted. Our children were now teenagers, and they had grown up in our small, isolated family unit. They were resilient and independent, perhaps more so than they would have been if they had grown up surrounded by extended family. But they also carried a sense of being different, of coming from a broken family, even though Daniel and I were still happily married. They saw their friends with their big family gatherings and understood that something was missing from their own lives. My daughter, who had always been perceptive, asked me one day if I regretted my choices. She said she had been thinking about everything we had told her about our family history, and she wanted to know if I thought staying with her father had been worth the cost. It was a hard question, one I had asked myself countless times over the years. I told her the truth. I said that I didn't regret staying with her father because he was a good man who had made mistakes, and everyone deserved a chance to make things right. I said that I regretted the pain our choices had caused, regretted that she and her brother had grown up without grandparents and cousins, regretted that our family was so small and fractured. But I couldn't regret the decision itself because it had led to our family, to her and her brother, to the life we had built together. She seemed to accept this answer, though I could tell she was still processing it all. She said that she understood why I had made the choices I did, but that it made her sad to think about everything we had lost. I agreed with her. It did make me sad, too, every single day, but sadness didn't mean I had been wrong. It just meant that hard situations sometimes led to painful outcomes, no matter what choices you made. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has happened, I still don't have a clear answer about whether I made the right choices. I can see arguments on both sides. I can understand why my family felt betrayed by my actions, and I can also understand why I felt I had to stand by Daniel. There was no perfect solution, no path that would have made everyone happy and kept all relationships intact. What I do know is that I made my choices based on what I believed was right at the time. I chose to stay in my marriage because I believed in commitment and in giving people second chances when they were willing to do the work to change. I chose to visit Catherine because I needed to understand the full truth of what had shaped my husband. I chose to support Daniel through his healing process, even when it cost me relationships with my family. Were these the right choices? I honestly don't know. The consequences of my choices are permanent. My children have grown up in a fractured family. My relationship with my mother and siblings is irreparably damaged. Daniel's extended family remains distant and cold. We have built a life together, Daniel and I, but it is a life marked by absence and loss as much as by love and commitment. Every family gathering that doesn't happen, every holiday spent with just the four of us, every milestone that passes without the participation of grandparents and extended family, these are all reminders of what my choices cost. But there are also things I gained. I have a husband who learned to be honest and vulnerable, who faced his trauma instead of running from it, who became a better person through years of hard work and therapy. I have children who understand that families are complicated, that people are imperfect, and that love sometimes means standing by someone even when it is hard. I have a marriage that has been tested in ways most marriages never are, and it has survived. I learned that there are some situations in life where there is no right answer, no choice that will make everything work out perfectly. Sometimes you have to choose between two imperfect options and live with the consequences of your choice. Sometimes being a good wife means disappointing your parents. Sometimes protecting your marriage means losing your extended family. Sometimes the people you love most will hurt each other despite their best intentions, and you will be caught in the middle trying to navigate conflicts that have no clean resolution. The question that haunts me most, the one I return to again and again, is whether the life my children have now is better or worse than the life they would have had if I had made different choices. If I had left Daniel when I discovered his lies, would my children have grown up with the love and support of grandparents and extended family? Would they have had cousins to play with and a sense of belonging to something larger than just our small nuclear family? Or would they have grown up with a mother who was bitter and regretful, who had walked away from someone who needed her and could never forgive herself for it? I will never know the answer to that question because I can't live both lives and compare them. I can only live the life I chose, with all its complications and consequences. And in this life, my children are loved fiercely by their parents. They understand the value of truth and commitment, and they know that their father fought to overcome his trauma and become the man they know today. Is that enough to compensate for what they lost? I hope so, but I cannot be certain. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to visit Catherine without Daniel's permission and to stand by my husband despite his lies. because this decision didn't just end my honeymoon early, it cost me the husband I thought I knew, turned our parents against me, and left our family so fractured that my own children haven't spoken to their cousins in 2 years. And I'm sure they won't be inviting me to my nephew's graduation or my niece's wedding or any other family event this year,